Good afternoon, everybody. I won't sort of take up too much time because I know you're here to see the panel and not me. It's a them day, not a me day today. So with that in mind, I will crack on with the questions, and I'll ask you to introduce yourself, give a little bit of background of what you do when you answer the first question. So, Zoe,
Okay.
can I give you the first question then?
I'll explain.
Okay. How can digital twins help innovate new financing approaches to help unlock investment in the net zero infrastructure?
Thanks, Mark. So I'll start by introducing myself. So I'm Zoe Jennings. I'm Head of Programmes at 3CI. 3CI is the City's Commission for Climate Investment. And we were launched, just to give you some context really, we were launched a couple of years ago. And basically we were a coalition. We started as a coalition of the 12 largest cities across the UK, working together with a wider local government. But basically, we're about developing innovative approaches to securing private sector investment into place-based net zero delivery. And our partners are the Catapult, our founding partners are the Catapult, London Councils and Core Cities. But now our partnership is much wider than that. We work with the Scottish Cities Alliance, Key Cities, Innovate UK, and the private sector community. So that's important to say, really, because our governance now represents 90% of public sector across the UK. So we've got that unified voice. And I guess I'm here talking from the public sector perspective in terms of why that's important. So yeah, in terms of your question, in terms of digital twin and net zero infrastructure, the principles of digital twin plays a critical role in kind of enabling data-driven decision-making at 3CI. So we've developed a new place-based investment model across our cities, which is called Net Zero Neighbourhoods, which we're about to launch the business case for that next week, actually. But basically, the Net Zero Neighbourhoods are kind of a replicable model in looking at funding and delivery of creating low-carbon energy communities, and it's about that street by street, neighbourhood by neighbourhood approach, which is really important. So we're looking at place-based, multi-asset, blended financing model, and we focus on packaging up projects, bundling projects for those neighbourhoods to attract long-term investment. So one of the things what 3CI is focusing on, we did a bit of research across those 12 largest cities, and the challenge or the opportunity cost, if you like, was 206 billion to deliver net zero transition. So there's not enough money in the public purse, and our role is about leveraging that private sector finance, that long-term finance for delivery of net zero. And I guess we look at the six different asset classes, and I think that's quite important for this, because we look at domestic commercial retrofit, transport, electric vehicles, etc., renewable energy, waste, and green infrastructure. So, and the way that we can combine those assets together is kind of key, really, in terms of developing those net zero neighbourhoods, because we look at data insights, looking at carbon emissions, potential savings, how we scale up, and how we build those portfolios, which is really important to kind of signal to the investment community, to kind of give that evidence for funding those projects. And I guess, yeah, when you're looking at buildings and roads, it's, looking at those emissions and things, and how you can use digital twin to test the policy interventions like electric vehicles to give you that evidence base.
Thank you. Janet, do you want to go next, and then Steve will come to you at the end?
Thank you very much. So, Janet Greenwood, I'm a Policy Fellow at the Institution of Civil Engineers, and I'm a Director at KPMG, and I lead the major projects team on the ESG side. A lot of our focus is on how we bring together and access some of this private funding, and I do feel that digital twins have a massive role to play, but particularly around storytelling. What we're facing in the future is massive changes in terms of the environment, social changes, and being able to articulate not only the future scenario of the baseline, but also the future vision, and setting out the possibilities for interventions, both to mitigate risks and really make the most out of those opportunities. That's where digital twins have a really key role. And I think actually we should focus on this storytelling, on the comms and on the language. I'm not sure that digital twins is a helpful term. But if we talk about future scenario visualizations or being able to test future scenarios, I think that makes it a bit more accessible to people so that we can genuinely start looking at what does the baseline look like, what are some of the scenarios, and this links, and we'll go on to talk to TCFD and other reporting frameworks a bit later on, but also about future opportunities for synergies and for mitigating some of those risks.
And finally, Steve.
Yeah, morning everybody. My name is Stephen Eglinton. I'm representing the World Bank. I'm a senior consultant in asset management there, physical asset management. My background, which I guess is relevant for here, is actually in digital and data management and that kind of stuff. So bringing it together, so a manifestation of digital twins is great for me because it's a talking point, it's the hook. Probably we didn't have. I originally have a background in GIS, digital mapping. So, you know, I would argue maybe some of the themes are different around ESG. We have a language set there, but just, I mean, it's hard for me to add things really because it's about the communication is absolutely the single biggest thing for me. Most of the time I work with people who have, let's just say, varied skill sets and varied domain expertise and maturity about how you would implement digital. So I think how we use digital twins incrementally is going to be the really challenging part for people. But how does it add value? It adds value because it is a manifestation. I can't think of any other word. I would argue conceptually there are things that we've been doing for a long time within digital twins, but it's brought together. I don't want to get too meta here, but it's connecting. The connected digital twins is connecting things literally, digitally, and then on a communication level as well. It's bringing people together. So I think that's the big value for me, because the data bit we can do in the background somewhere, but could I describe it to somebody? Probably not, but I can point to a digital twin. So, yeah.
Well, thank you. And I'm sticking with you, Steve, and that sort of mindset and your World Bank hat. I mean, and then Janet, I'll ask you the same question. What are the blockers that you're seeing at board level? You know, what is stopping the introduction of digital twins? You know, we all know finance is using them of varying uses. I mean, the FSA have a sandbox digital twin looking for payment fraud. You know, so what are the blockers from the financial perspective, and then stipulating it? And then Janet, same question to you later. You know, from the consultancy point of view, what's stopping people from interacting and using? Steve?
So again, this is my thing, so I could go off on tangents. I won't. The brief answer is the funding streams and the way funding pools perhaps haven't been joined up. We can talk about joined up and connected digital twins. However, money needs to come from somewhere at some point, and that's not connected. So I think that's the single. So I'm not saying that's a flippant answer. That's quite a key answer. How do we get that connected, cohesive, holistic funding strategy in the first place? And the way and the accountants. I'm not an economist, obviously, but the way we do accounting doesn't necessarily lend itself to having digital assets on the books. So they're two of the biggest, like, literally things we're trying to work through with the World Bank at the moment. How do we put a value of whatever we mean by that? And I know it's not necessarily dollar signs or pound notes or euros. How do we put a value on the digital data itself? And that's hard, but we're doing it. But that's a blocker.
Obviously, consultancy side, you know, Steve said value on the data. It's obviously going to be something when you're auditing that you're going to have to cover off.
Yes, I think at the moment digital twins are framed very much in terms of risk mitigation, and that is about avoiding future spend in the event of an extreme event or increasingly adapting to the new norms. And it's much easier to make the business case for a new revenue stream or new income generation. And what you're actually trying to do at the moment is to use them as a tool to argue for the stitch-in-time funding, which is great if you're taking the long view. But if your framework is a much more short-term framework, it's harder to articulate why you should invest and spend that money. I think things will change as both the frequency and probability of events changes and the impact of those events changes. Then I think the argument for that stitch-in-time funding, for getting that visualization tool, will become an easier sell as people's expectations changes. Everyone in Canada would expect the snow events to be well prepared for. And I think as the norm shifts in the UK, that argument will be easier to make. Also, there isn't a pipeline of investable projects. I think that is a bit of a challenge, and I'm sure that will be spoken about a bit more later. And we also touched on communication and education and upskilling. Sometimes I think the decision makers, to Steve's point about the varying degree of maturity and understanding, there isn't that baseline at the moment. So really understanding horizon scanning, what the environment is going to be like, both the planetary and the commercial environment in the years to come, and the opportunities afforded by digital twins to make your business resilient. I think these will all change over the coming years.
So with that in mind, sticking with you, Janet, obviously you can go sector specific. Will infrastructure, because obviously infrastructure investment is a far longer period than the vertical commercial. Do you think that the infrastructure market could actually drive that digital adoption with so much money now coming in from banks, from overseas, from UK investors, and their mindset to use it? Do you think that the infrastructure in the UK could be the leading market?
I definitely think we've got huge opportunity in innovation. I think there's a lot to be worked through still. The business model, the return on your investment isn't yet clear. Tideway was a great example for a project that attracted a great deal of investment, but it had a very clear return. People were required, and remain, and I am one of them, required to fund it as part of your water bill. But actually making the case in that financial return is a challenge. And of course, although assets have a long life, perhaps your ownership of that asset doesn't have a long life. If you're actually looking to invest over a 3 to 5 year horizon, then that longer term thinking is less of a driver. So do we have the potential to be an innovator here? Absolutely, yes.
Excellent. I see Slido is up, so if you do have any questions, please do. Henry, I'll rely on you. We can go old school if you just want to put your hand up and wave. So, any questions? Are you okay?
Yes, we actually have quite a few that have come in. I thought I'd come stand at a lectern. It makes me feel powerful. So there is a common theme that's come up in a couple of questions, so I thought I'd try and tie them together for you. So first of all, Ian G's question, are we quantifying and pricing carbon and the externalities of carbon explicitly enough so that digital twins could inform investment decisions? And are we willing to scare people where necessary? So this kind of ties into another question, which is, will carbon costs influence investment decisions in digital twins?
Who would like to take that? Janet, I know. Go on.
Happy to kick off, but I'm sure both Steve and Zoe will have some input. No, it's the maturity of our carbon pricing is it's got a long way to go, and I think we are. So that's talking about putting carbon into a financial metric, and that's immature. But I think there's also a piece about moving beyond the financial metrics into the non-financial metrics and having that balanced scorecard for decision making. We talk about, in the 90s, you had scope, cost, risk and time. It was all very nice, clear cut. Now you've got biodiversity and nature, you've got social value, you've got carbon and environment, resilience and adaptation. We don't necessarily have neat financial metrics on those, and yet they have to be blended with the day-to-day business priorities for us to take holistic, comprehensive decision-making. So it's both about making sure that our financial metrics are comprehensive and also finding a way to bring in those non-financial metrics to inform decision-making, because at the moment we're seeing a tiny piece of the impact that we're having on nature, the planet, etc. as we make our decisions. It's not comprehensive whole system decision making at the moment.
Interesting. Steve, do you want to add to that, or Zoe?
The answers are no and yes. And I can't remember the second question, but I know that's what they are. I think it was around what I picked up, which wasn't actually the question, was about should we scare people? Yes, probably sometimes. So most of my day job is trying to make a story which has to be very bespoke, and I think that's a challenge of these kind of topics. So obviously indirectly I work for the UN, so we talk about sustainable development goals and the ESG, etc., but obviously the assumption is most people here would work at a senior level, but not necessarily. Maybe that's not the right story. So I think should we scare people? Yes, but with the right story, and it might not be at a global level, that might not be the right story. It might align with it. And a quick plug is ISO 55000 series. ISO 55001 is a it's a global standard in strategic asset management, which talks about this kind of stuff and aligning. It's nothing to do with digital, but I recommend that. Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, I would say partly yes, actually, from a local authority perspective, because when they're actually looking at identifying projects to actually invest and put forward for investment, then that is part of the decision-making process, but not the only one, obviously.
Henry, do you have any more?
Oh, we've got one more that jumps out at me, and I'm not sure I understand this language. I think this might be a finance question. The transfer of value from beneficiaries to cost bearers is a key barrier. I think that's a statement, not a question. Is this part of the city, which is a capital C, so I assume it means the City of London, discussion, question mark. I'm going to do that all again, one more time. The transfer of value from beneficiaries to cost bearers is a key barrier. Is this part of the city discussion?
Is the person who asked that in the room? Because I want to make sure I got this right.
I don't know. There he is. We've got the
Please.
microphone for you.
So,
We've got the microphone. Just be coming to you shortly.
from what I understand, you're talking about from the original loan being handed, or being engaged with the city on the financial aspect.
Yes, it's basically somebody's going to benefit and get revenue or other benefit from a data that somebody else is going to bear the cost of creating. And how do we address that problem?
Which goes back to the earlier question on how do you value the data within inside the digital twin?
Well, by definition, I don't have anything to do with the city. The World Bank works in other countries. So I'm probably the worst person to reflect on this, but only to make it relevant. I'll tell you the parallel, part of my day job is teaching the BIM standards, the international standard, and that is exactly the same challenge. If we put more effort into digitalizing, for example, project data, then there's massive value downstream in operational and maintenance. Exactly the same conceptually, I would say, and it's a challenge. And I would say it requires, again, a good story. Like people should... My question would be, forget digital twins for a minute, how do people get investment now? Do you mean? I would say that's a corporate governance problem. I'm not, you know, and I would say just remove the word digital twin for a minute. How do people get investment now? How do they, whatever they do now, use the same languages? And that's not my expertise, but that's my response. Don't know if that helped.
Anybody like to add anything else?
Well, in terms of, from what we're doing at 3CI, and picking up Janet's point on the investable proposition side of thing, you know, we have huge complex data that we're dealing with in terms of developing projects, and actually what we're doing is developing a national net zero project pipeline. So it's a one place where you've got a UK vision. It's like a strategic picture of the UK infrastructure net zero projects across the UK, so which is really helpful. We're working with sort of over 50 local authorities at the minute. We've just gone out to another 30 to kind of collect that data. And that looks at all sorts of data in terms of project maturity, carbon emissions, cost savings, the project scale, locations, and we're trying to aggregate those projects locally, as well as on technology-wise, as well as regions, to generate that scale for investment. So for us, you know, at the minute we've got 1,000 projects in the pipeline worth about 60 billion. So as you can imagine, across those different 6 asset classes, huge amounts of complex data to deal with. So there's a massive role where that could help put that data in one place and actually make sense of it, I guess. Yeah.
Do you want to add anything?
I'd just like to come back on the scaring people point, if I may.
Of course.
Thank you. I think there is a place for really understanding the scale of the challenge ahead of us, and that is scary. If we're just scaring people with no idea of what the roadmap is or the vision is of a good future that we're moving to, that just leads to paralysis. So I think it's incumbent upon us as industry experts to be able to articulate that future vision. By 2027, we have digital twins which will, and that we all then can move towards that vision and make that a positive, flourishing and inclusive, sustainable vision. So I think scaring has its place, but not if it leads to paralysis. We need to be positive, constructive, and moving towards something.
I'd agree with you. I don't think, you know, Steve used it himself. All three of you said it. The biggest focus around communication, engagement, and leadership. That's the key thing. So we've got 5 minutes left to finish off then with a final question to all three of you. what strategies do need to be put in place to actually get people to value the twin aspect, the digitalization aspect of a project? I mean, and I'll give you an example. You go to Rightmove now, you look at a house, and it gives you the average broadband speed you can expect. So that is perceived as having a value on you buying a property. Going back to the earlier question about investment, what strategies can take place in the board that actually gives people that value in the data that's being collected? Who would like to go first?
Well, I would say as an engineer working in a primarily financially focused firm, I often joke about setting up the Institute for Joining Up. There's actually loads of expertise out there, but it's often in silos. All of the major companies in the UK are now subject to the TCFD reporting and disclosure requirements, Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. If you have operations in Europe, then you are going to be subject to the CSRD, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, which includes double materiality, your impact on the climate and the climate's impact on you. Both of those sets of regulations require boards to think about future scenarios, future temperatures, and how resilient their business will be in those future scenarios. To give you an example, which of us in this room would put all of our pension in British Gas? Some businesses are going to be stronger in the future and some will be less strong. So you can be guaranteed that in these large organisations, there are teams of people beavering away to create those corporate sustainability reporting disclosures. And they're led often by the CFO. They have huge power, but they often are in a bit of a silo. Equally, we've got the ability to create some great stories, to really manage, to articulate future scenarios and to look at risk mitigations. And I think breaking down silos so that when those disclosures, which are hugely powerful, are made, they are linked back into the expertise within the organisation and across industry. So I would say breaking down silos within organisations and across between organisations.
Zoe?
Yeah, I think from a public sector perspective, and particularly on the development of these investment grade, projects, which is what we're trying to do, I think it's actually about developing that business case robustly and be able to communicate that upwards in terms of governance and leadership to get that buy-in, to then be able to proceed and then develop those projects. Obviously, there's a skills and capacity piece that's associated with that, and that's really important. But demonstrating that by using that data collection, I think is really important to then be able to build the projects to go for investment.
That going back sort of 5-6 years later and actually analysing.
Exactly. Doing that monitoring and measurement piece.
Cool. Steve, final word?
So strategic. My strategic position would be, I completely agree with a roadmap that shows, the scaring bit was scaring and then provide a solution. So I agree with that. But I think the strategy would be keep it tactical and operational for people, right? At some level. Again, at a strategic level, then it has to. But what are the examples at an operational and tactical level that fix challenges that are known? So I have quite a strong background in rail, for example. We can talk about strategy, but I could list off 100 things that we could tackle at operational and tactical level. Lots of will be linked with health and safety, and people will listen to you all day about it. So I think give tactical examples. It's reiterating the other points, really. Keep the case study clear. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, with that, we have 2 minutes left, so I will draw it to a close. I will say thank you very much, Stephen. Thank you, Zoe. Thank you, Janet. Especially thank you, Henry. And again, thank you all for your time.